This is International Master Eric Kislik, and today we're going to look at the game between Aline Robers and Hans Niemann from round 5 of the Tata Steel Challengers tournament. I wrote here that Niemann had spectacular wins over Deschmuke and Vrolik with white to start off the tournament and wanted desperately to win again. And I do want to stress one thing here. Niemann lost the game, but it wasn't like he got blown out of the water or he was being outplayed the whole way. A big factor was kind of the psychological situation in the tournament, in that he was doing very well after 4 rounds. And there's something that happens in one of these tournaments where you have certain games which are can't lose games. In particular, let's put it this way. Let's say you're playing black against someone slightly higher rated and you're content with trying to play really solidly and you really don't want to lose that game. Then there are games that are must-wins, where you absolutely have to win the game to either have a chance to win the tournament, or if it was a norm tournament, have a chance to get a norm. And this is one of those tournaments where Hans really needed to try to show something, and playing black against a lower rated opponent, he thought this was just going to be the opportunity to really push and dominate. And I will say one thing, I have coached Grandmasters before who just lost really emotionally difficult games, and the main thing I tried to do as their coach was basically say, hey, we're focusing on tomorrow, and really the game that you played, yes, you overpressed, yes, things didn't go how you wanted it to go, but analyze the game deeply. It's going to provide a lot of things for you. When you analyze the game deeply and you have answers to everything you were curious about and you know every mistake that you made, it provides a certain finality to this issue of this sort of negative tension you have about the game. And suddenly you actually feel fine about it. You go, okay, it really didn't go how I wanted it to go. I have some lingering negative feelings about it, but you know what? Focus your positive energy forward throughout the rest of the tournament and you can do much better. Anyway, let's take a look through the game. E4 was played. C6 was played by Niemann. D4, D5, E5. So we have an advanced Caro-Kann. One of the 4 central goals in the opening, achieving a cramping pawn on the 5th rank, was achieved by his opponent. And essentially, one of the keys for black is trying to challenge it, trying to make sure you get in C5 or F6 at a good moment, usually C5, but sometimes F6 is played, such that you can break it down and get counterplay against it. In this game, pawn breaks are going to be very, very important in our discussion of what mistakes were made and how equality could have first been achieved by Hans in this game. So he plays bishop f5, main line, bishop to e3. Interesting move. I mean, one of the ideas behind this move for some players is to play knight d2, g4. It's kind of one of these open-minded moves where knight f3 doesn't give you that g4 option. So you can sometimes play this a little bit cleverly when you do this. I generally have just played kind of the main line with just going knight f3, bishop to e2. Also played a good deal of other lines like knight d2 to b3, prophylactically trying to discourage the c5 break. Although they usually force it in anyway, but you have a way to counter it. So anyway, bishop to e3 was played. And typically here, black chooses a line exactly like Hans did, where he directly goes after immediate counterplay and also tries to sort of mess with the coordination of the opponent's pieces. So take a look at queen b6. Okay, he hits the b2 pawn. She plays queen c1, e6. So simply preparing to develop these pieces on the king side. Knight f3 is played. Knight to e7. Yeah, that's a typical move, and part of the point behind this move is very often black will play h6, bishop g6, or bishop h7, and then later come out to f5, and that will help resolve the problem of this bishop on f8, which is currently not very good at the moment. So a4 was played. I kind of like that move. Actually, there's kind of a deeper point behind this a4, a5 type of maneuver. One of them is that if black doesn't do anything, okay, we go a5. But if black plays a5 and then later plays c5, by the way, that happened in the game, then the b5 square becomes tender and in most cases becomes a stable outpost for the bishop on f1. So it's kind of trying to be tricky about fighting for that b5 square. The other point is if they play c5 and eventually give us a queenside majority, we've already started advancing our majority. So there were many times where I played a4 and I didn't even realize, oh yeah, if they play c5 and I take, I'll already have my majority moving. So Hans stops that plan with a5. Knight bd2. Typical move. Typical developmental move. Also, a lot of the time, if you go knight c3, the knight just gets in the way. h6. Okay, Hans goes for the bishop h7 plan. Bishop to e2, helping to prepare to castle shortly after this. Although, you don't have to castle right away, and you might want to pursue a slightly different plan in some of these positions. So he played bishop h7 here, and I did highlight that bishop g6 is better and more fitting here. You'll notice later in the game he does come back with bishop to g6. So it just kind of stands to reason that he probably realized later on, even though the bishop might feel a little bit unstable here because it can be chased away by moves like knight h4 or h4, h5. They won't play h4, h5, but it can be chased away. But then when you go back, no time is really lost because the opponent's piece will be chased away. So I put in a variation here. Let's say c3, knight f5, hitting the e3 bishop, bishop e7, castle. Castle, notice this knight is unstable, so it can be chased away right away by g4. Take, take. And yeah, the key here is that now black gets to kind of seamlessly play c5 after that. So interesting variation here. You'll notice some differences with the game. So knight to b3 was played in the game. Yeah, here he played knight a6. I wouldn't have gone for that. I get what he was trying to do. He was trying to go knight b4. But notice that this knight a6, knight b4 plan is countered by bishop d1, and it's not really clear where you're going after that. So I think he experienced a little bit of that problem in the game. And this also kind of speaks to how sometimes going for slightly riskier threats is not as good as just playing a straightforward plan, pursuing a certain pawn break. I actually have a nice line here that shows a different pawn break, in fact. So knight f5, hitting the e3 bishop. Bishop d2, bishop g6, going right back into the type of position I was showing before. g4, chasing away the unstable knight. Knight h4, okay, hitting the unstable bishop. Castles. Knight d7, f4. Now, with white trying to kind of gear up towards playing f5, a very nice move, and this is just a really nice positional pawn sacrifice. You play h5, trying to expose the king here with no pawn cover on the g-file. So h5 is a very nice pawn break that shuts this down. Also, another nice point behind this move is that it may make it so that you don't need to play the standard c5 break here. So this is also a potential risk in playing g4, is that you're allowing the h5 move because g4 serves as a hook for that pawn. All right, so g takes h5, knight f5, take, take. Well, now I have this move. I have the g6 break as well to open up the position even more. So I put in a few more moves here. Take, take. Yeah, now I can just play bishop e7. I have a bunch of possibilities here. I can just queenside castle in some cases. You know, I also had ideas in the game. Well, I can also play bishop h4. Now, you will have to be careful, of course, about bishop takes a5 type moves. So there's also the idea instead of bishop e7, you can also go bishop to b4. But yeah, all things considered, White's king is pretty exposed, and bishop h4 is a pretty annoying move. So you know, this would make black at least equal. So knight a6 was played. Now castling was played, and this is the favorite topic of one of my students: to castle or not to castle, the ultimate question. And we can do something here where we sort of save a tempo. I can go bishop to d2. Knight b4, bishop to d1. Now, this is interesting because it's not quite obvious what black's next move is going to be, because you'll notice in the game, knight f5 was played and knight f5 kind of flowed seamlessly there. But here, knight f5 can be directly hit by g4, and then you lose time. So this is the better move order, and then black will probably play something like queen c7 and not go for the knight f5 plan. So now if they go for the knight c8 plan, kind of a favorite of Topalov and some other great players, now I can play knight e1, and you know, now I have good control of everything here, and I can later play c3 because I'm controlling the d3 square. So for example, knight b6, bishop to f4, and now I can play c3, take, take, rook e1. And here black has not succeeded in getting in a pawn break, even though they have made some slightly annoying moves, but they haven't succeeded in it. And I can get rid of the d3 bishop with a move like bishop c2, so no real achievement there, and white is slightly better. So castling was played. Now knight b4, hitting the c2 pawn, bishop d1, defending the pawn. Knight f5, gaining that tempo against the unstable piece right here. So the bishop drops back to d2. Bishop to e7 is played. Yeah, I thought the best move here was just to go g4, challenge the unstable piece, go for f4, consider going f5. That does look more scary, although what you can say about this position is by getting in c5, even if I give up the bishop pair here, it's not really a big deal. One of the reasons also why it wouldn't be a big deal is the bishop on d1 is very far out of play. So if that bishop was going to cause some damage on b5 in some other lines, it can't do it here. So in any case, knight e1, which was similar to the other plan I was showing before, was played. So now she tries to chase the knight away. So castles c3, knight to a6. The knight goes back. Yeah, now's an interesting moment because what I'd be thinking about here is, okay, these pieces are both actually very effective pieces at the moment. So the bishop on h7 is just kind of annoying, cutting through the entire position, and the knight on f5 is pretty well placed where it is. So right here, I would go bishop c2. Now, here's an interesting moment because black probably has to break with c5, and I need to get my g4 move in because that was the whole point. So c5, g4, knight h4, take, check, and then I can go bishop e3. Now, remember I kept stressing the importance of these breaks. Well, now after c5, now I can go f5. I think that's a strong move to throw in. So take, and here you may wonder, well, why should black be fully equal here? A big reason for it is, well, they basically have no bad pieces once they double the rooks on the f-file, so there's really no special reason why white would be better now. Knight f3 was played. Now this was a really interesting moment because this was the first moment for a clear natural pawn break for black to come through, and you know, it's hard to explain sometimes how these sorts of mistakes happen, but he switched back to the bishop g6 plan, so he kind of admitted that the bishop should have gone back to g6 earlier. But here's the thing, c5 may have been delayed earlier because of his other plan, and bishop g6 was intended to be played earlier, so there was a little bit of mixing up of the plans here. But I think c5 was the perfect move. And the other point is, remember the point I made about the bishop on d1? Well, the bishop on d1 can't help here because it would like to be on b5, but it can't get there. So if that was played, and then we go take, bishop c2, challenging that annoying h7 piece. Take. Now I get an annoying move like knight b4, and okay, I defend the queen, and then I can play moves like knight c5, or sorry, knight c6. And yeah, now we're getting some pretty good counterplay, and white's position looks a little exposed. Also, keep in mind the fact that the pawn on g4, what it actually does here is it does loosen the position, especially with only two minor pieces here. With more on the board, you would have more to attack with, but there's not that much of an attack here. Okay, this was an amusing kind of double mistake. I won't say double blunder because it wasn't really a huge blunder by both sides. But black had the c5 break, and now white has the c4 break. And notice what the c4 break does. If you get in c4, now you can clamp down with c5. That becomes very, very awkward for black here. So let's say they play bishop b4. I'll just go c5. Okay, they take, hitting the queen. Take, queen d8, queen c3. This is a great grip on the position now. Now I can play f4. So here I go f4. Black is definitely not equal here. So nice position for white, nice grip, nice bind. And notice what c4, c5 did. What c4, c5 did was it was getting in your own break, but it also shut down the opponent's pawn break. So it was just a good case of strong prophylaxis, keeping your good space advantage. Okay, h3, like I said, that was mysterious to me because that just allowed the c5 break. So c5 break comes in. So now Han starts to take over a good initiative here. And I know what this is like because I've played many tournaments where you're playing a lower rated player in a closed tournament, and that's another thing. The closed tournament element has a huge factor here because you pick certain games, I mean sometimes not even consciously, and you go, okay, this is a must-win game. I have to press, I have to try to squeeze. And sometimes what happens in those cases is you rush a little bit too much. And in this case, what was a little surprising is he was slow on the break before, but now he got the break in. So now there's some momentum flowing here. So I totally understand the situation that he was in the tournament, but I have also overpressed against lower rated players just because I felt I absolutely had to win. So you'll see this happen later on. Now, his opponent should have just played g4, take, bishop e3, trying to secure the center. But what black does, once again, is gets in the second break, rook e1, f6. Both breaks come in, and then now the center kind of disintegrates. So this is exactly why black would be slightly better there. So d takes c5 was played, which was just a weaker move. And one of the reasons it's a weaker move is look what it does to arguably black's worst placed piece. Now, you could say the rook on a8 is not doing much now, but it will do something later. So d takes c5 was played. That wasn't good. Also, another key point, which I haven't even mentioned yet, is that once d takes c5 is played, we'll take a look. Now we have a strong centralized piece right here. Now I also have the d4 break coming up too. So you've given the opponent a strong centralized piece plus a break to play pretty much out of nowhere. So d takes c5, definite positional mistake. So bishop f4, good move by his opponent. Now he played rook ac, and I get it, supernatural, worst placed piece, you bring it into play. But the first thing I'm thinking is, well, now we have the break. We have their pieces kind of put on awkward squares. You know, these pieces on the back rank here, queen on c1, bishop on d1. Now if I can break, let's say bishop c2, take, I isolate these two pawns. This looks like it could potentially be a big problem. So for example here, knight d5 and bishop f8. Now, if this had been played in the game, this looks like a very substantial advantage, very close to winning. So rook ac8 was played. Again, not a bad move, but in a couple of these cases, just going for that break right away had no strong reason to reject it, so we would want to go with that. Bishop e2 was played, and one of the problems, I get it, she was trying to go to b5, so I totally understand why she played bishop to e2 here, but I think a little bit better here would have just been to go, you go bishop c2, you go queen b1, and I would just try to hold tight. And I know a lot of people psychologically can't really do that. They don't like to do that. But yeah, if you don't weaken anything, it's going to be very hard for the opponent to win this. So, you know, that would be my first thought here. Just go rook e1, try to keep the position as tight as possible. And yeah, black is still clearly better here, but you'll see in the game that the game continuation is even stronger. So here Hans goes for the very good break. So I do want to stress the point. He did play really well for a certain kind of sequence of moves were played very well, actually by his opponent too. So both players made a lot of good moves. So I don't want to give you the impression that he was blown away or was a terrible game or anything like that. A lot of regular chess games have this kind of up and down flow to them. So you'll see what happens after this. So bishop b5. So white goes to the pretty stable square that they were trying to go to earlier. Rook fd8, improving the worst placed piece, makes a whole lot of sense. If you don't have a whole lot of ways to keep improving the position and you have one piece not in play, swing it over. There we go. Queen e1, all right. She moves her queen out of the way. D takes c3. B takes c3. Okay, so we have these two isolated pawns. Now, part of the question is going to be, are those actually easily attackable or not? That's what the next phase of the game revolves around. So he plays knight e7, good move, trying to move the knight over to d5. Queen e2, knight d5, hitting that bishop. The bishop has to drop back to defend the pawn. Bishop d2. Yeah, so here's where I feel like he started to move a little bit in the wrong direction. He tried to pile up on the c-file, but I think what he unfortunately found out is it wasn't actually that easy to increase the pressure there. And so he tries to have all that pressure on the c-file, but I have a much simpler plan. How about just bishop h5? And here's the nice part about this. You get white to play g4, then white is the one overpressing here. But, so here's a line that I put in. Bishop d3, queen c7, so I'm kind of keeping an eye on the pawn. Rook fd1, knight e7. Now if they play something like g4, I go bishop to g6. Now this is starting to look very awkward when you just look at white's position. I mean, the pawn on g4 has no real reason to be there. There's some kind of vulnerable squares. The pawn on c3 is still isolated. So this would, all in all, be very bad for white. So rook c7, kind of a step in the wrong direction. Rook fc1, yep, once again, improving the worst placed piece. Good sound move. Now rook dc8, and like I said, this pressure didn't really get him anywhere, so it wasn't really the right direction to go. But here's another point, is that the play on the c file is not that clear, because we can go c4. If you go c4, is c4 really a target? Well, with what? With the light squared bishop? With the knight? Well, not really. So what value are you getting at a c4? Well, you kind of got to be careful about that. So she played knight e1. Okay, that's a fair, natural move. An even nicer move is actually this move could be played rook d1, involving ideas like c4. And so, for example, here's a cool little line. If rook d8, you go take c4, just using that pin right there, just to throw that out there. Say I go here, take, rook c2, take. Notice in this whole sequence right here, a lot of simplification occurred. Black is probably very slightly for choice, but white's done pretty well to have stable, well-placed pieces and everything defended. All right, let's go back to the game. Knight e1 was played. Now, what I was proposing here was actually just sort of switching back. So he goes bishop e7, but notice one thing about bishop e7. Bishop e7 commits the knight to b4, but I want the knight to have more flexibility. So I would actually like to go back to the other plan and just go rook d8. And, you know, the best player ever, in my opinion, at doing this was Karpov. He's like, oh, I tangled up my pieces. I put them on squares where they were less effective. All right, let me just switch them back. And he would just go right back to where his pieces were. Just like, no big deal. I'll just go right back. And the humility in that is really admirable. So I would have gone straight back. I would have gone Karpov on this one. Just go back, admit your pieces were very well placed, you know, and then I can get something like this. Then I might play the plan that he was going for, something like this. And I might go queen a7, just getting out of the way of the a5 pawn. c4, knight c7, you can see this knight is being hit. So let's say here, and queen b8, and the knight is still being hit. So black's still better here. Better structure, targets, certainly a better position. All right, bishop e7 was played. Yeah, the problem with all that pressure on the c file is just that it didn't do anything. So I put in a line. I mean, we can just click through it. c4, knight b4, rook d1. Yeah, and let's say I get this. And here you can see clearly c4 is not an attackable target. Just can't put any pressure on it. You have no way to get real pressure on it. So yeah, I mean, I can kind of go into this sort of a line and just you know, go knight f3. And yeah, very solid. Very solid. Notice another key point when I do this. Good control. Good control of the d file. Everything's pretty safe. So it's just a good example of just nice, solid play, holding a position very tight. All right, so let's go back to the game. Queen f3. Yeah, a little bit of uncertainty there, because you don't know, is she going to go c4? Is she sort of afraid to play c4? Seems like she's a little bit uncertain what to do there. So yeah, like I said, I was showing the c4 line. So bishop g5, nice move by Hans there. Plays bishop g5, also kind of softens everything up here. So take. Now there's some real pressure on c3. Now rook a3. I again thought that was just unnecessary, because why not still just go c4? So let's say c4. I'm switching over to the file. Yeah, so here's a problem here. These are good pieces. You need to try to challenge them. I had a chapter in my second book, Chess Logic and Practice, which was all about challenging strong pieces like this. And I had people of all ratings, I mean, many players over 2,000, come up to me and go, I never read that in the book before. That's the single most useful thing I've learned in the last 5 years playing chess. And I go, yeah, I never saw anyone write about it, so that's why I wrote about it. And then all these people told me, mostly really strong players, were like, oh yeah, that was good that you put that in there. That was a nice thing to put in there. So what I always think of in this kind of a position is, how am I going to fight against these pieces? And queen e3 is a very nice move. Yes, it doubles and isolates my pawns, but notice what it does. It gets rid of that strong queen, and it gets rid of that knight, at least where it is. So I could play this, and also notice the other thing. Are these clear targets? Not necessarily. So in a position like this, I'm actually pretty solid. So I would try something like this. Black's still slightly better, but that's what I would be going for in this case. All right, rook a3. Again, one of the problems is the undefended pieces. These are both undefended. Yeah, Hans went for the wrong move here. He went for queen c5. Yeah, just would have gone here. Or just would have gone knight f4. Queen e3. take, knight d5. Now you can force c4, but now in this case, now finally we have some targets over here, either a4 or c4. Also, there's this plan, trade off that piece, then you have the targets, then you can attack something. So I continued the line rook c3, bishop e4, and bishop c6. Now there are real targets here that we can put meaningful pressure on. Okay, so this was played. Yeah, I thought the simplest move was just rook b3, queen e3. I trade off, go bishop f1. And even though black is a little bit better here, notice one of the key points. There's major simplification going on. And I did engine check this pretty deeply, and it basically concludes that white is able to draw. That's not that obvious to a human player in a game. I would have assumed slightly better for black. So, for example, the engine line is you play g3, you sack that pawn. But notice the key, we're latching on to this pawn on f7, and now it actually, well, later I'm going to attack this pawn too, but it becomes, they have to give up the pawn, and the best they can do is something like this. So, black's not really actually going to be able to objectively win this. So that's a really interesting way that the play could have developed, and this is very similar to many examples in the chapter in Chess Logic and Practice on simplification as a tool for equalization. So white should have gone for deep simplification here. You go for queen e3, you trade off the queens, you go for pressure against the backward b7 pawn, you keep up that pressure, and if it's followed out to its logical conclusion, you can get a draw there. All right, so c4, yeah, I believe he probably just missed this move. Could have easily been just, not having that much time here. But bishop e4, nice shot. This would be a nice shot against the queen. Notice the queen is responsible for defending the rook. So if this had been played, you throw in that move, you throw in knight f4. Very annoying. We have knight e2, and then we also interfere with everything here. So if this had been played, this could have actually been very strong. Also, we have some pretty nasty tricks here. Like if f3, I have knight e2 check to win the queen. So got to play something like rook d1. Yeah, rook d1, queen f5, knight f3, rook c5. Yeah, this is exactly what black wanted. You clear out some space, you increase all of this pressure. Very, very hard to play. Defend g5, and the bishop on b5 is way out of play when there's all this, play occurring in the center and on the king side. All right, so he goes knight e7. Like I said, bishop e4, knight f4 was the way to just go boom, boom, boom. You keep attacking on the king side and in the center. So queen c3 was played. Bishop f5 is a good move by Hans there. Well, I thought the key idea is you go ahead with g4. I thought that was his big idea. And so then he didn't play g4 after this, and I thought, I wonder, with some really strong players, when you analyze the game afterwards, I sometimes wonder if they don't realize, hey, this might be a tendency I might want to look at with delaying the breaks. So I would have gone back because it discourages g4. So I just would have done this, just really simple, just, okay, I'm lined up with the backward pawn, everything is actually doing something useful. The knight on e1, although it looks passive, it's guarding squares. The queen is guarding things and preventing g4, so it's doing things. Yeah, I just would have gone ahead with g4. G4, all right. And also, notice the point. You can use the extra doubled pawn as a battering ram because, now you're slightly weakening their king and you're giving yourself a strong piece. So I would have gone for this as black, and black looks to be a little bit better. All right, so knight d5 played by Hans there. So he does go back to f4. Once again, a couple of these moves, it seems like he realized during the game my piece should have gone there earlier, and that happens to everybody, so I totally understand, why that ended up happening here. All right, so rook d1, queen e7, rook to d6. Yeah, something weird kind of happens here. He tries to challenge the file, but he can't. He actually can't challenge the file effectively here. So really the best thing to do, what I thought he would do is I thought he's just going to go g4. I thought, oh, bishop f5, he's playing really strongly and really aggressively here. Take. I mean, now I have threats like maybe take and queen g5, and then maybe I can't take the pawn unless the queen moves, but I do have pressure here, so I'm getting something moving here. So, and now g3 is a good move. Take, knight to g6, rook e3, but I do have the same queen g5 move. I am putting pressure on e5, and yeah, this looks like an interesting plan. I have moves like, knight f5. So rook d8, so challenging the file was the wrong way to go. So queen to d2, and, well, now he's not going to take because of the fork. So he tries rook c8. Now c5, interesting move. Interesting move by Aline there. But what I would have done is I would have gone for the entire fight on the file. I would have done this, and now I'm just going to switch over and just totally dominate the file. So here, rook e1. Now it starts to look very bad. Queen e3, take, take. Just looking at the power of these pieces, you can see black's in serious trouble. Plus, that pawn's probably going to fall on b6. So c5 was played. Interesting move, just not the strongest. Yeah, I mean, another point here is that if rook e3 had been played, it would have avoided this bishop e4 move, which was possible. So let's say h4. And I did still basically write in here and conclude that we are still objectively winning. Knight takes c5, going for this fork with f6. Take, 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 f6. Take, take, but this is not a draw. White is still dominating here. So so here I can go rook d3 and f4, and yeah, the problem is, yeah, black has, I mean, certainly there's a threat of like g4, potentially ideas of rook takes d5, but yeah, this should be objectively winning for white here. So yeah, the extra pawn does really matter here. So f6 was played. That was a little bit loose, and the biggest reason why it was loose is now I can play h4 and just look at what this does to the king side. Rook a8, like let's say he moves the rook out of the way. Take, 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 take. Then I go knight e5. Now I have knight d7, kind of a nasty move. Rook e3, and again, just look at the pieces. Black's is being totally pushed around. So this is a line I put in, and you can pretty clearly see, even though black's pieces look pretty good, they're not actually helping out here. All right, so bishop c4 was played. This definitely let black off the hook a little bit. F takes c5, knight takes c5. Yeah, the key here is that knight d5 does actually help assist in the battle for the file. So he tried to do this afterwards, but it didn't work. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So if he had gone knight d5, take, take, let's say rook g3 attacking this pawn, knight b6 hitting the queen, take, 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 knight takes c4, knight takes c4. Rook d4. The knight actually does not get trapped. This is kind of a cool line. Take, knight takes a5 right here. Bishop e4, king h2. Then I have rook g4. So this is what helps us save the knight. So take, take. Now we're in this ending where we're slightly better, but the problem is with 3 versus 2 right here, it's hard to get a strong pass pawn. So I think we can only claim to be slightly better here. All right, so king h7, you'll see the problem here in a moment. Rook e3, that was a very strong move. That was the move we were talking about before, getting that resource in. You know, I was saying I move 39, it's move 42 to get that move in. All right, so now I would go b6 to try to undermine, and again, try to assist in the fight for the file, but the g4 move that was played in the game comes in. Take knight d7, that's a nasty move. So now there are very, very serious problems here. So, for example, rook c7, I play knight f6 check. I pick off that rook there. And actually, one thing was kind of funny. I checked this with the computer, and it said to play rook b7, and I was like, wait, can't I just take the piece? And then I take the piece, and it says +4, and it's like, oh, yeah, you're just winning. So, weird case of the engine thinking some crazy move was playable when it just loses a piece. All right, so knight to d5, bishop takes d5. Yeah, there's no good response to this. I mean, there are a lot of problems here. But yeah, one of the big problems is, yeah, this x-ray against the queen is terrible. So take, take, take. Okay, so it seems like he's relying on this pin on the d-file, but there's g4. And that's a nasty shot. And you can see, if bishop g6, take, take, bishop e4 check, whoops. There goes my queen. Oh no, my queen. So, yeah, rook c5. Yeah, very nicely played by Aline here. G takes f5. So if queen takes d5, queen takes d5. E takes d5, knight d7. This is just a winning rook and knight endgame against the rook. So let's go back to the game. Rook takes d5. So he still remains down the piece. Queen e2. Notice how effectively she's able to attack with these three pieces here, by the way. You can see just how well they coordinate. So maybe king g8 would be played, or should have been played, and then you can just go king g2, everything's guarded. So e takes f5 was played. Now there was a very nice sequence. Queen h5 check, queen h6, queen f7, which is hitting both of these, the f5 pawn and the d5 rook, f4, rook e1. It doesn't really change anything, so check was played, king h2, f4. Nice little sequence here of checks. Queen f5 check, king g8, queen c8 check, then queen c2 check was nice. Here, queen c2 check, and now she just swings the rook in, goes here, and later gets this check. So here, rook d8, check, and now we have knight f7, and that's game. King h7, knight f7. So there were a couple of problems here in this game, just kind of conceptually, for example, with black not playing some of the pawn breaks earlier, not using the hooks as well as they could have been used. So you can build up a ton of positional understanding from playing complex games like this and drawing valuable conclusions from the analysis of your games, which is different from just kind of reading something somewhere and going, oh yeah, I think I get that. If it's your own game, it's going to be very personal to you, and you'll have a much greater reason to dig deeply into a game like this. I mean, here was a case. It wasn't even my game, and I spent a good 45 minutes analyzing it. Why? To get all of the answers to all of the questions I have. And that's a very healthy way to do it, because you let curiosity propel you forward. Your curiosity then makes you a quite good chess player. Here's a very simple example that I've given many times before. The simple example I like to give is, let's say you have 500 tournament games, and on average you have 3 piece exchanges. And you deeply analyze, were those correct? And you use Stockfish or Leela or whatever to answer that question. If you answer that question clearly to yourself and you understand if they were good, bad, or neutral exchanges, you have then just deeply studied 1,500 piece exchanges. You kind of become an expert on that. If you're 1,600 and you do that, and you suddenly play a 2,100, and there's a key piece exchange and you're evaluating it, you might evaluate it better than the player who was previously 500 points higher rated than you a few months prior to you doing this work. So that's exactly why it's so vital to dig deeply into these things. But I would also stress the other point that the loss in this game was not because White was a better player or anything like that. A big factor was because this was a must-win game, the level of risk just goes off the charts. So Hans was willing to do whatever it took to try to win the game. So that's exactly why I'm not really criticizing much of what he played per se, just because you will be in situations where I've thought exactly this to myself, where I thought, okay, I'm playing this FIDE Master. I really have to try to win. If I can, let's put it this way. If I win 2 of them and I take some big risks and I lose one of them, like let's say I play 3 FIDE Masters in the same closed tournament. If I can win 2 of them and lose one of them, it's much, much better than having 3 draws. And now sometimes what happens is, you win 1, you lose 1, and you draw 1, but it's still a better feeling than like 3 boring draws or something like that. But the other thing is you learn much more about chess having a complex up and down crazy game. Some of the most memorable and instructive games I ever played were these crazy up and down games, and many of them went into things that I previously published. Like if you check the chapter on analyzing your own games and applying logic in chess, those were not games that went well for me, but they were games that I learned a lot from. And in one of the games in there in particular, I lost this game and I didn't feel like I had a good understanding of the pawn structure and what to do with the pawns. So what did I do? Well, that's the beauty in chess. You can go and look it up and go, hey, wait a minute, how did people win with black in this opening? So I go and I look at hundreds of games, which you can do pretty easily in ChessBase, just to see, all right, let me find the black wins and let me see what they did with their pawn structure to give me some dynamic chances. Give me some aggressive chances. Give me weaknesses to play against. Give me something to play for. And you'll find if you do this active work, you'll become a really good player. And it's just about doing this active work and not having, kind of too passive of an attitude, because so many people are sort of like, well, I'll just watch this or learn this and then I don't have to do too much work on my own. But here's the thing. If you play a whole bunch of tournament games, you have to do the work every time. You always have to do it. But here's the thing. It should be fun, and you should want to discover answers to the questions that you have. So that's how I would frame this. And it didn't go how Hans wanted it to go, but I think there's some valuable lessons, and he should definitely consider digging deeply into pawn breaks. I have a pawn breaks PDF, so if you want to email me and get access to that, feel free. I suspect he would get every single one of them right, but sometimes you just focus on the right things, and then in the right moments, everything goes how it's supposed to go. So that's available for people who are especially curious and interested. And I hope that this provides some context to this game, because it's probably not the context you heard anywhere else. It's a little bit different. It's a bit more nuanced. And this also takes some of the blame off of the result from Hans, because what happened is someone emails me and goes, Hans lost to a 2300 girl. And I go, okay, that's surprising. Let me see what happened in the game. Like, you know what my brain jumps to immediately? Oh, did he overpress? And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, he did. He overpressed. That's why I had a chapter on overpressing in the black book behind me, because it's very important. And you need to think about it. You need to think, what are the limits? Am I actually able to take this kind of a risk? And this goes into a deeper discussion of risk, which I'll discuss in a later video because we're already 41 minutes in. But the topic of risk, a key thing to note is it depends a lot on the evaluation of the position. If you're equal and you take a risk to be slightly worse, if you're playing a lower-rated player and you think you're seeing the board better and evaluating positions better, you can often take a risk to be a little bit worse. But if you're taking a risk that might lose you the game, you might have an outcome like this one. So didn't go how Hans wanted it to go, but I think there's some valuable lessons. And the key is bounce back strongly and, get that finality from the deep analysis of the game and just move forward.